Good morning. Welcome to the FNL podcast. My name is Vicky Denton, and I'm your host. Our guest today is Jeff Harmening. Jeff is a senior program manager for API. He's with the Global Industry Services Group. He's in charge of the technical report that API recently released on life cycle assessment for lubricants. Jeff, I'd like to welcome you back to the show. This is your second time to guest with us. Um, it's been a number of years. That was before the pandemic. So
hmm
a lot has happened since then. You've come up with this report in May. Tell us a little bit about the background. What is this technical report from API?
Well, Vicky, thanks again for having me. I really appreciate this, and I'm a big fan of the podcast as well. And thanks for having me come here to talk about the recently published TR 1533. Just to answer your question in terms of the background, it was back in June of 2021 that API's lubricants group established a sustainability work group, and they were charged with gathering subject matter experts from basically all the contributors to the lubricant value chain. The subject matter expert groups, in turn marshaled their task force and began to assemble the framework for TR 1533 that autumn of 2021. That subject matter expert group includes experts that are supplied by the oil marketers, the base oil manufacturers, the re-refiners, the additive technology companies. All of them shared in this effort. Thanks to their hard work and their dedication, as well as a really rigorous meeting cadence, this group was able to prepare a draft for ballot with the API Lubricants Group in just about over a year. And that resulted, obviously, in the publication of Technical Report 1533 to API's engine oil website, which is accessible free of charge. And that took place in May of this year. So it's been out there now for a couple of months.
So the full title of the report, Jeff, is Lubricants Life Cycle Assessment and Carbon Footprinting, Methodology and Best Practice. Now, why is it a technical report and not a standard?
Well, really, this group was working hard for about a year, and at the time had amassed 53 pages or so of information. As you know, API standards development processes can take some time, so we felt that this was significant breadth and depth of knowledge contained in this report that we wanted to get it out as early as possible. They had been working on it for a year. They could all use a nice little break too. So we published it as a technical report in May of 23. Now they are getting back to the hard work of bringing in the next edition of this. There is quite a bit of materials that still need to be worked on. This would include the not only all of the commentary that came in from the balloting members, the API members of the lubricants group, but we had plenty of comments from organizations outside of API as well that we want to incorporate to harmonize with other methodologies that are in publication and in particular in Europe, in Asia, and other markets of the world. So with all of these comments, our subject matter experts still have a lengthy task ahead of them to include other the outcomes of these comments, as well as finish some of the things that were on the wish list as they were approaching the end of the first edition. So we've got a lot of work, and they are meeting, as a matter of fact, this week to kick off that work and get into what would ultimately end up being a second edition to this, and the goal of that group is to take this thing to a full recommended practice or standard within the API standards list of impressive API standards that we have already.
So you mentioned, Jeff, that you started working as a group in June 2021. The
Mhm.
first edition was published in May 2023. What were the difficulties in putting the report together? What would you say were the main? I mean, I see this as groundbreaking because, as far as I know, there's no such thing as a lubricants life cycle assessment anywhere in the world until this report came about. What were the difficulties that your group encountered?
Well, I think the biggest difficulty was establishing who the subject matter experts were that were going to participate. We started the work group in June of 2021, and then there was a little bit of time before each of the member companies and the participants supplied their subject matter experts. So we really kicked everything off in the fall of 2021. And then in terms of a meeting cadence and schedule, they met for about 13 months before they got the draft finalized. And remember, we're talking about full life cycle analysis here. So there's a great deal of information that has to be considered, worked out in a consensus based approach. Um, that this group, through their rigorous schedule, was able to pull together what we see today. And then because the way that we operate our standards, this document needed to go through the overarching sustainability work group before it went into the API ballot process. Um, this is a big document, the API ballot process. It went for ballot earlier this year. We had a 60-day ballot. And then we had to deal with the myriad of comments that we received, not only from members, but also the liaison groups from other organizations around the world. And so that's a process that takes time, as it would in any standards development organization. Uh, the important thing to the other important thing that this group was tasked with was pulling together a group of international liaisons, um, to share information, to give each other updates on where other parts of the world were at in this process, so that they could harmonize to the best extent possible and reduce onerous um, requirements from one marketplace to another marketplace. So this sustainability liaison group it consists of a group of industry organizations. It includes, here from the States, the ACC, the ILMAs, the NLGIs. From Europe, of course, it includes the ATLs, the UEILs, the ATC, VSI. And then in your neck of the woods, ALEA was a big contributor, and other groups like the Australian Lubricants Association, all come together routinely every couple of months to harmonize, share information, and again try to minimize the onerous requirements from one place to the next for our members, for the lubricants folks who are using these methodologies to answer their customers' questions and ultimately compete in the marketplace. This was a lot of effort, and it was a threefold task for the sustainability group in addition to drafting TR 1533. So I was really impressed at the speed with which they were able to produce TR 1533 as you see it today, in really that small window of time of 12 months, 13 months before we went to balloting.
Yes, and I think we have to understand too that this was just 1 year into the pandemic. So people were working from home or or maybe not working. Was that a particular challenge for the group that we were in the midst of the pandemic?
I think by June, when we really and late into the autumn, by the time our cadence really started ramping up, remember we were doing this all via Teams. That makes it a very challenging process. You've been involved in our API lubricants group. You've seen the way that things work face to face. Imagine trying to do that, on a team setting. So yeah, there were some difficulties there, but I'll say that really the timing, sort of the most important thing about the timing was the North American lubricants industry, as sustainability reporting really evolved into this global mega trend over the course of the last couple of years. There was a strong desire by our member companies, the North American lubricants industry, to really nip in the bud and have a clearly defined consensus-based document that captures the broadly accepted terminology and methodology for life cycle analysis and product carbon footprinting. So um, it was the North American member companies of the API that really wanted to sit down and get this done. So we felt that it was a natural fit for the API lubricants group to take up this task, and in turn they created the work group and the subsequent subject matter expert task force to accomplish those goals.
Give us some of the highlights of the report, Jeff. I'm looking at the table of contents here, and a lot of terminologies, methodology recommendations, some of the things that you have to consider um, when you're doing life cycle. Can you maybe give us some of the key points of this report for our audience?
Absolutely, and appreciate the opportunity to do so. So the technical report, as you'll see, it I think that the three big things that it takes care of, or at least addresses, is really taking what was, think back a few years ago, a pretty confusing list of definitions. This being a mega trend, there are a lot of different terminologies out there that have been used, and it was really necessary, especially for some of the smaller marketers who don't necessarily have a sustainability person on staff, to understand what these processes entail, what these terminologies entail. So this document goes a long way to define those terminologies. Then what it gets into, certainly the meat and potatoes, is to discuss what the 6 stages of the lubricant life cycle are, um, all the way from raw materials down to end of life, and address each of those areas, and give good technical information and recommendations on how to address each of these areas as you begin your own sustainability journey, and trying to determine the carbon footprint of your own products. Um, the last thing that it does, I think rather impressively, is it gathers in the appendix. As a matter of fact, it gathers a very long list of publicly available information that has been published by everybody from the EPA here in the U.S. to the Gavi system. Um, and provides a good list of potential secondary resources for data, to assist, again, those companies who are just getting into this and may not have a dedicated subject matter expert. um, so we publish that list there. It's also available and in more real time on API's website, where we offer API TR 1533 for free. You can look that up just by Googling API TR 1533, and I think it's pretty much one of the first entry on there. So I encourage folks to go out and take a look at it, especially those that might be swimming in questions as they, work towards, determining their own individual product portfolios, carbon footprints.
So, Jeff, API is a trade association primarily consisting of the largest American companies that operate in the upstream and downstream part of the oil industry. And obviously, here we're focused on lubricants, which is a tiny part of the oil and gas industry. What did API hope to achieve with this technical report when you set out? And did you achieve it at the end?
The only thing that we didn't achieve was getting it to a full recommended practice per API's guidelines. So, in terms of what we were attempting to achieve, was certainly to make these, define these terminologies, provide a methodology and the recommendations within, to in turn, sort of provide a one size fits all sort of guideline, um, that we can use to, I'll use a word that everybody uses a lot, use a phrase that everybody uses, sort of level the playing field. Companies are going to be eventually competing, if they're not already, on these sustainability metrics, especially if their customers are asking for it. And it's important for this industry to have a recognized practice, that everyone can follow, so that you can have confidence as a customer to these folks, that everybody's calculating it the same way. That if you're specifically evaluating your business with a company solely on the product carbon footprints of their products, that everybody's calculating it the same way. So the goal was to release a full recommended practice, which would basically provide those guidelines. And because of the timing and because of the sheer amount of information and the need for these guys to get a break, we decided to put it out as a technical report first within API's practices and procedures. That technical report, in a subsequent revision, can be, uh, moved in towards a full recommended practice or standard within API, and that's the goal for the next round here. So that's where we fell short, if you want to call it that, but we really wanted to get this information out to the industry. We receive a lot of questions, and incidentally, since this has been out there, there are other parts of the industry that are now looking to this methodology as and using it in say perhaps in terms of asphalt. This is a resource. This is a resource that the member companies are really in tune to. At least using as a playbook to help find and define sustainability and product carbon footprints for other petrochemical products as well.
And in fact, in the report, you do talk a little bit about packaging materials, not just the components of a lubricant. So,
Absolutely. It's an
um,
important part of it.
do you intend to take that further?
In terms of defining the 6 stages of the lubricant life cycle, that's pretty well set in stone. The types of things that, this is a living document. API 1533 is I will consider it a living document. Um, as I said a little bit earlier, we received a ton of valuable comments from industry members, from the lubricants group participants, and from the international community abroad. These are good suggestions. They contain, they're valuable suggestions. So we're going to incorporate these into the document in the next revision. But there are also some, wish list items that we still need to address within the document itself. Some of these include we didn't include full example reporting forms, for instance. We did not include a full work. There are working examples in there, but an end-to-end working example. So these are things that the group wanted to delay until the next revision. So we'll be tackling those as well. And of course, the goal for the SMEs, for the subject matter experts that are part of the task group that are, wrote this document and will continue to improve it, is to issue this as a full recommended practice. So we're winding that up and kicking that into high gear now that the document has been out there for about 3 months and has been in the public domain. We wanted to give these guys a little bit of a break as well, so we are cranking that up this week to begin another rigorous cadence to pull together the improvements that we want to make to the document, and hopefully release this as a recommended practice later in the year.
Do you have a timeline, Jeff, when the recommended practice would be ready for balloting or for public comments?
Yeah, I mean, we don't have we're just meeting this week to really kick off and level set the group for what this next version will entail. So we'll probably be establishing a timeline during the meetings this week as a consensus group. In my mind, wishfully thinking, of course, I would like to say that we would be nearing something at the end of the year, but the best laid plans sometimes. So our goal is to work as quickly as possible over the course of the remainder of this year, to potentially get a ballot out sometime in the first quarter or second quarter of next year. I would suspect that that ballot would again take just as long, maybe 30 or 60-day ballot, maybe a 30-day ballot in this case, because we're only modifying the document as opposed to having a brand new document. We felt 2 months was appropriate for first edition standards review process. So we'll be looking to do that. We'll be inviting others for public comment when we get to a stage where we've got a draft. So again, wishfully thinking, I'd like to think that we would have a nice draft ready to go here, for a potential ballot sometime early next year. But it really is up to the availability of resources with the group and the members that will do the hard work here.
You mentioned earlier that you work with an international liaison group.
Mhm.
Um, you have a working group um, that works with different organizations in Europe and Asia. Um, what kind of inputs do you give them, and vice versa? What's the purpose of this liaison group?
Yeah, so a typical liaison group, and we'll be meeting for, I think, about our eighth time. since its inception, is really to do just information sharing, things of that nature. One of the things that we did was we opened up at the same time that we opened up our ballot. In fact, actually, probably a few days before the ballot opened up, we provided the draft document to the members of the liaison group with the option for them to, provide comments to us and a deadline to do so within a by that 60-day deadline, because we take all the part of API's processes for standards development is to take any comments, not just from member companies, but from public comments as well, and address them before we determine whether a ballot passes or not. So all of these were assembled, incorporated into the draft, and then decisions were made around some of the comments to pass that off to the second edition, which we knew was going to fire up a few months after publication. The other types of things, like a typical sustainability liaison group, will obviously contain a roundtable so that each of the organizations can update the other participants about what they may be working on, about they may be dealing with from a regulatory perspective, to share that information with our group, um, for for our availabilities. And then I've actually had a wonderful time working with this group. I can say I have not worked with such a diverse group of organizations that represent lubricants related companies from around the world. Um, they are, we're actually, being asked to provide commentary on other projects that might be in the works, other standards that are in the works. Again, the goal of this group really is to ensure that, from one place to the next in the world, that we've got a not duplicating our efforts, so to speak, and also not imposing onerous requirements unless regulations required, of course, that our marketers are going to have to deal with differently from, say, the North American marketplace to the European marketplace to the Asian marketplace as well. We want to um, minimize the differences in practice as best as possible, so that our member companies can, come up with timely, accurate product carbon footprints, life cycle analyses that that may be valuable across marketplaces, as opposed to doing it again in a separate process all over the world.
Correct me if I'm wrong, Jeff. A lot of the sustainability work that's being done around the world right now are really driven by government regulations, right? The technical report actually was silent on government regulations. Was this intentional not to have it in the appendix?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think we normally include that sort of thing in the in API standards. It might be a more of an API standards limitation, but yes, we don't address any individual regulations around the world in our standard. What we're doing in this, I keep calling it a standard, it's technical report. What we're doing in this technical report is, providing a definition, consistent set of definitions and methodologies to help people through this. And those subject matter experts are, of course, acutely aware of what the regulatory requirements are. But again, this was developed by North American, lubricant manufacturers, and lubricant supply, raw material suppliers. So we don't have necessarily the same regulations that, say, for instance, Europe does at the time. So their goal was not to focus on the regulatory side, but focus on providing a practice that everybody could use to sort of level that playing field, so everybody's numbers are relative.
Yeah, and you were talking about the ATL slash UEIL sustainability guidelines. They were actually working maybe a little bit behind you, maybe by about a year or two than API. So I think their goal is to have something published in September of 2023. Could you comment a little bit on the difference between the API technical report on LCA and product carbon footprinting versus the one that ATL and UEIL are putting together for Europe?
Yeah. They reached out to us, obviously, as liaisons in the liaison group, to give API's group an opportunity to review their documentation and provide commentary, sort of returning the favor, so to speak, because they did the same for us. And I wasn't as intently involved on that. I missed one of the subject matter expert meetings, but we did prepare a nice short list of our comments as a North American from the North American perspective. Um, and I'm not an expert at the differences yet. I was not part of that process. But what I can tell you is um, the overwhelming sense that I get from the subject matter experts is that these documents line up very nicely. Again, and I think that that is a credit to, us working together, routinely meeting as liaisons to talk about the important differences from one place to the other if they exist. And I don't think that that there are any extremely onerous requirements in there that would require a company doing business in North America to do something completely different in the European marketplace to report their product carbon footprints. We're all sort of following the same sort of uh, ISO provided definitions, and then individually are we're working on the specific methodologies behind how you do that, and they line up quite nicely, from my understanding.
In North America, is there a reporting requirement uh, at this point to give your scope one, scope two, and scope three emissions to any organization, like maybe a state government or a federal government agency?
Well, that's a little bit out of my area of expertise. To my knowledge, I don't. I'm not aware that there are requirements in current regulations that require this. But what I do know is that the original reason that we pulled this group together to put together the technical report was because primarily commercially driven, because member companies and independent lubricant companies alike were being asked, maybe on a case by case basis, to provide this, maybe in a local municipality, or in a state, or what have you, where they needed to report these. And that's really what drove our group to come together to pull this together, was making sure that everybody was operating on a level playing field, not necessarily the regulatory side of things.
Yeah, basically to be able to state for a company what the carbon footprint is of their lubricant product.
Yes, and give confidence to their customers that that was calculated with sound science and methodology, and give them the extra confidence in the choices that they're making when choosing to work with company A or company B, that everybody's reporting something that was developed, and produced in a similar manner. You could say that at least at once, this was sort of a Wild West area when people realized that these were questions that they could ask as part of trying to do business in lubricants. There was a need to make sure that we standardize this to the extent possible, and the technical report goes a long way to helping those folks figure out how to do this for the first time.
And well, I guess just a comment. The document, it looks like it's very technology neutral. You don't really recommend a particular approach versus another one, like mass balance versus something else.
Yeah, well, we can't, because we realize that there are realities from place to place. But at the same time, there is a recommended method of calculating these numbers, and a recommended unit that these numbers need to be calculated. And essentially that's mass by weight for carbon for each of these products. So to answer your question, yeah, there's variability, and our documents basically take what are the ISO 14040s and 44s and 14067s, ISO documents that are, and which are frameworks for any company producing a product, and it hangs on that lubricant specific requirements. So that was the methodology that the group used to attack this this big issue of coming up with a technical report, was to take what everybody's using, the ISO documents, and really hang those additional lubricant specific requirements on them.
Yeah, and just in contrast, though, although they didn't really produce a report like an extensive report like yours, the ATC, which represents the additive manufacturers in Europe, actually came out lately to say that they're going to use the mass balanced approach to make the playing field level for all additive manufacturers in Europe. Um, it doesn't really, how would you say it? There's really no conflict between what the API technical report says and what they said, right?
Yeah, that's right. And look, ATC has been an active participant in that lubricants, the API's lubricant sustainability group, since the inception. They certainly joined in providing valuable feedback into our feedback loop for our ballot. Um, I worked with Jackie quite closely at that time, and yeah, I'm happy to say that our two publications do align quite well, and having a complementary practice available that's specific to the additive industry, no doubt lends itself to more accurate and consistent sustainability reporting of a finished lubricant product overall. So I want to thank them and really all the liaison members for their time and their valuable feedback as we all strive to harmonize these practices and sort of figure out how to do this in a level competitive playing field well into the future. And there's more work to do,
Yeah,
certainly.
and it's a big first step, the first edition.
Hmm. Yeah, it's the first time I've ever put a stand. It helped as a staff member for API, overseeing the meetings and whatnot. It was very interesting to see one of these things come together completely, especially one so large. You're familiar with API 1509, and I've been involved with API 1509 as well. This was the first time I've taken one from end to end, and it was just it was amazing to work not only with subject matter experts who, like I said, were meeting every 2 weeks or thereabouts, giving tons of their time into this effort, but then to see the outreach from the other members around the world that were interested in following along and providing feedback into the process as well. I'm 100% confident that this is the best version that we could put out at the time, and we're really cranking up now and ready to take this to the next level in the second edition as we begin our efforts here this week.
Yeah, just for background, for people who are not familiar with API 1509, it's the engine oil licensing program or system of API,
Mhm.
which is actually a global program, not just an American program. And you were in charge of the program before I guess before the pandemic, right? Before you took this on. So um, that was definitely way before your time, Jeff, because I think that's a document that goes back to the 1960s or something.
Yeah, some version of it does. The modern day EOLCS licensing system, and incidentally, API 1509 also houses the API specifications for engine oil performance, as well as the ILSAC specifications for engine oil performance. So it's been the modern version of that's been around since '93, and you've probably, in the times that you've sat in our meetings, have seen. Well, we're up to 22nd edition or so. So yeah, I'm proud to be a part of that, and I'm equally proud to have been a part of this 1533 effort as well. We think this one will be around for a long time, and will be in a constant state of improvement as well as the science and the resources are continue to change. We'll be updating that document frequently.
How do you get the number 1533? I mean, is it just like there's a technical report that's 1520, 1532? Is that how API numbers them?
Yeah, so they gave us the 1500s in the engine oil side of things because we have API 1560, which are the lubricant designations for gear oils and stuff like that. We've got API 1525, which is bulk engine oil practices for handling and transportation and storage of fluids. So they just give us the 1500s. So if we come up with another document, 5 years from now, it's going to be 1534 or something like that. It's really no more complex than that.
But there is no 1532, right?
Yeah, there may have been in the past. That's why they assigned us 1533, was because I think back in the old days there was, and now they don't want to reuse it. So yeah, that's just one of the weird behind the scenes ways
And
that we've got over 700 standards published right now. So there's a lot of numbers already been used out there.
and when it becomes a recommended practice, it gets a different number, right? And a different name completely.
Yeah, I think that we have some leeway there. It might turn into RP 1533. I've asked that question of my own standards professionals here at the office, and I think we can convert this thing into RP 1533 and supersede all previous iterations. And I think that's the goal that we're going to be shooting for.
Yeah, well, Jeff, we really look forward to hearing more about what's next. Um, you know, uh, Future developments in TR 1533. Thank you so much for your time. Really appreciate it. It's very early in the morning in Washington, D.C. Thank you for getting up for us so early.
Absolutely. No mind at all. I get in here an hour before this thing started anyhow. So thank you for having me. Thank you for giving me a few minutes of time to spend with your podcast listeners. And I, for one, even though I don't listen to my own podcasts, I will be listening to all the other podcasts.
Great. Thank you so much, Jeff.
All right. Thanks, Vicky. Take care.